Pathfinder is all about fighting monsters. You both have hit points, that's HP, which represents how alive you are, and you will take turns hitting each other until someone hits 0 HP. That character dies, and you win! But, of course, it's a lot more complicated than that. Sometimes there will be 2 enemies. And, of course, you are there with your friends. And all of this combat takes place on a battle mat. Each square represents 5 feet. On your turn, you get 3 actions and 1 reaction. 3 actions, 1 reaction. The most basic of these actions are stride, that's just moving, or strike, that's hitting the enemy. Stride, you can move up to your speed. Strike, you then attack something. Remember, you have 3 actions. You can do this in any order on your turn. You can stride, strike, stride. You could stride, strike, strike again, add a penalty. You could strike 3 times in a row, again with more penalties. Or you could strike, stride, and do some other action like, well, eat some cheese. Oh, yes. To perform almost any difficult action requires step number 2. Roll a 20-sided die and add relevant modifiers to exceed a difficulty class number. You roll a d20, a 20-sided die, and you add numbers to make that number as big as possible. For example, let's say you want to jump across this cliff. Well, you roll a d20 and you'll add relevant modifiers. In this case, the GM might tell you athletics, because you're jumping across a cliff. The cliff is not that wide, so we'll give it a difficulty class, DC 10, which means you need to roll the d20 and add your athletics and exceed or meet DC 10. But let's say the cliff is even farther apart. Now the DC is 15, it's more difficult. So, you roll your d20, you get a 14, that's not enough. But you add your athletics. Let's say it's a 3. You get a 17. That means you can succeed at jumping across this cliff. The third step that you must always keep in mind, if you exceed the DC by 10, it's a critical success. But if you fail by 10, it's a critical fail. That means you don't just want to meet or exceed the DC, you want to exceed it by as much as possible, which means you always want to get those modifiers on your d20 rolls as big as possible. Let's say that you want to strike a goblin. You roll your d20, and you'll add the relevant modifiers. On your character sheet, that's that first number here. You don't even really need to know where it comes from after you make your character. Once you make your character and write down that number, all you need to know is that is the number you add to your d20 roll. Let's say the goblin has an AC of 16. AC is the difficulty class, what you need to meet or exceed in order to successfully strike an opponent. If you roll a d20 with a +6 and you want to meet or exceed a 16, you have a 55% chance of success and a 5% chance of critical success. The odds are not bad. If you succeed, you can roll the second number, 1d8 plus 3, or whatever that is on your character sheet, and by that much you can reduce the opponent's hit points. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. That means in any situation you always want to get this number as big as possible, and you want to get this number as small as possible. We'll now introduce 3 techniques that you can help make that happen. Flanking, taking cover, and the multiple attack penalty. First, let's talk about flanking. Remember, you are on a battle mat with your friends fighting against monsters with their friends, which means you can use your friends to help you. Let's say your friend has finished their turn, and as one of their actions, they moved right here next to the goblin. On your turn, you then choose to stride and go to the opposite side of the goblin, flanking the opponent. If you're on the opposite side of the goblin, they take a -2 penalty to their AC from being flat-footed. What does that mean? The goblin's AC has now been reduced from 16 to 14. That means your 55% chance of success and 5% chance of critical success has just gone up to 65% and 15%. Much better. We can now talk about the second thing you can do, take cover. This takes 1 action, hence the symbol. Let's say you used your first action to stride, you use your second action to strike. Well, what should you do for your third action? It, of course, depends on the environment, but let's say that you have moved right next to this pole or some kind of object on the battle mat. That means you could potentially use the action to take cover. In most situations, this will give you a +2 to your AC. Now look at what has happened in one single turn. First, you reduced the goblin's AC to 14 by flanking. Then you hit the goblin, reduced their HP, and now you've taken cover, increasing your own AC. This would be a very effective turn. Now we can talk about the third thing, multiple attack penalty. In this situation, we first did a stride, then a strike, and then take cover. But what if instead of taking cover, we wanted to strike a second time? Seems like a good idea if you're trying to reduce the enemy's hit points as much as possible. What you have to remember is that within your turn, every strike you take incurs another -5 penalty. That means the second strike you do is a -5 penalty, and the third is a -10 penalty. Let's go back to our situation with the goblin. Let's say you want to strike the goblin for a second time. Well, that means your +6 to your d20 roll will be reduced by 5 to a +1. That reduces your 65% chance of success and 15% chance of critical success to 35% and 0% respectively. The second strike is significantly less likely to succeed. Let's say in a hypothetical situation, you wanted to strike for a third time. That would again reduce your modifier by 5. That means you're down to a 10% chance of success. Each subsequent strike is less and less effective. That's why it's very often more useful on your third action not to strike again or strike 3 times in a row, but flank or take cover to give yourself other bonuses that could help you in the fight against the goblin. So let's review. First, on your turn, you gain 3 actions and 1 reaction. For most actions, you roll a 20-sided die and add modifiers to exceed a certain difficulty. Number 3, if you exceed the DC by 10, it's a critical success. If you fail by 10, it's a critical fail. What kind of actions can we take? Strike, stride, flank, take cover. Use your actions wisely.